Welcome to Monobiology. In this lesson, we're going to talk about the differences between prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. Now that we know that living things or organisms are made up of cells, we're going to learn about the two major classes or groups of cells, prokaryotic and eukaryotic. Prokaryotic, eukaryotic. Now, there are many different types of cells that exist in nature. In fact, in our own bodies, there are thousands of different types of cells. Can you name some? For this one, for instance, well, this group here, anybody know what those are? This one here is a red blood cell. You can tell because it kind of looks like a button. See how it's indented here? Round, indented. And this one is a white blood cell. This one's used for carrying oxygen. This one's used for fighting off infections. Now this cell, or these cells down here, are nerve cells. These cells are onion cells. I know, we're not going to actually have those in our body. Well, we might, suppose if we just ate onions. But these are what onion cells look like. These guys here are called bacillus. They're a bacteria. And these guys down here are called Staphylococcus aureus. And they're a type of bacteria, in fact, that live on people's skin. They can also cause infections. Some people have strains of Staphylococcus that are resistant to most types of antibiotics that we have currently. Okay, so let's learn a little bit more about these particular cells. Some cells are more primitive than others. Bacteria cells are far less complex and tend to be smaller than the more complicated cells like animal cells or plant cells. And those cells that are smaller, these ones, these types, the ones I talked about before like Staphylococcus aureus and bacillus, they are prokaryotic. In fact, all bacteria are prokaryotic, whereas all animal and plant cells are eukaryotic. Prokaryotic cells. Prokaryotic cells are, 1, smaller than eukaryotic cells. They do not have a nucleus. That's one of the defining features. We talked about cells already in this course, and you know that cells have a nucleus. Well, these guys don't. These bacterial cells, these prokaryotic cells, they don't have a nucleus at all. And in fact, they really don't have any organelles that are surrounded by a membrane. They do have a cell membrane, and they have ribosomes, and they have all kinds of other cellular factories, if you will, mechanisms, but none as organized as the organelles that are in eukaryotic cells, except for ribosomes. And all prokaryotic organisms are unicellular organisms. And an example of a prokaryotic cell is a bacterial cell. Unicellular means a single-celled organism. On the other hand, eukaryotic cells are larger than prokaryotic cells. In fact, they're as much as 10 times larger. They do, in fact, have a nucleus, as we've talked about, and they have several organelles that are surrounded by membranes. Okay, so not only does the cell have a membrane, but all of the organelles within the cell are also surrounded by a membrane, including the nucleus. Now these cells can either exist by themselves or as part of a much larger organism called a multi-celled organism. Examples of eukaryotic cells, the two main ones that we will focus on, are animal and plant cells. So this is just a basic introduction to the different groups, the two major groups, prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells, since we know from the cell theory that all living things are composed of at least one cell. The cell is the basic unit of life, and all cells come from pre-existing cells. We have to kind of look at the two major different groups of cells, and these are them. Now, what we're going to do really quickly here is we're going to have a discussion about the differences between plant and animal cells. So the two major groups underneath eukaryotic cells are plant and animal cells. What are the differences between those? I want you to research that, and I want you to bring your answer to class. What are the major differences? How do you tell that something is a plant or an animal cell? For instance, this cell here is an animal cell. You can see that here. What does it have that plant cells don't? Or what do plant cells have that it doesn't? Okay, so write down your answer for that and bring it to class. Here are the references for the pictures that you saw in this video. That in a nutshell is the key differences between prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. Make sure you bring your questions to class.